to the One-to-One Brightmont Academy podcast. I'm your host, Griffin Rouse. Thank you so much for joining us. Today on the podcast, we are honored to have David Kaufer, the host of the Lighter Side of Autism podcast. We are so grateful to have you here. David, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Griffin.
Thanks so much. So we're going to talk, David, about 15, 20 minutes about kind of just general, autism related stuff. And then we're going to have a question and answer session. Feel free to put your questions in the chat. We'd love to hear from everybody. And before we get started, we're going to talk a little bit about Brightmont Academy and then a little bit more about David. So every month, Brightmont opens their doors to prospective parents and students to explore their campuses, meet the dedicated staff, and see firsthand how the one-to-one instruction model helps students thrive. If your child needs a more personalized learning experience, this is the perfect opportunity to discover if Brightmont is the right fit for you. Don't miss out. RSVP for a tour now at brightmontacademy.com and take the first step toward a brighter future. So again, we've got David Kaufer today, and David is a branding, marketing, and communications expert whose career spans work with Fortune 500 companies to startups. He's appeared for interviews in lots of places, including Inc. magazine, the San Francisco Chronicle, and Seattle Times. He's also a host to a podcast, as we mentioned, The Lighter Side of Autism. David lives outside of Seattle, Washington, with his wife, twin sons, and their family dog. We're excited to have David on the Brightmont podcast today. David, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks, Griffin. It's great to be here. I'm really excited to talk to you.
So, David, tell us a little bit about kind of what brings you here, kind of your journey with your son.
Well, we only have 45 minutes. No, I'm just kidding. No, so Stone is 19-year-old, non-speaking autistic. We say non-speaking, unreliable speaker. Diagnosed just before his third birthday on the spectrum. Like, as you had mentioned, he had a twin brother. So kind of presented interesting parallels in terms of their development. His brother Ty was always in the gifted programs. He was the one who taught himself how to count, like he was counting to 100. He was watching the Weather Channel when he was 4, memorized all the highway systems in the state, just kind of off the chart type of stuff. And so that's what kind of made it interesting, is that, in the meantime, then we had Stone, who we were being told was intellectually, challenged and all this. And so it's been quite a journey. So Stone was in the intensive ed program in the public school system here in Washington State until 2 years ago. And it's about 3 years ago is when we learned about a communications methodology called the spelling method, or spelling to communicate. There's a lot of different names for it. But essentially what it is it focuses on kids' ability to use their gross motor skills to point, basically, that they can point to letters to spell and to answer questions, as it turns out, and literally unlock their brains. And once we discovered that, as we progressed, we were entirely blown away by Stone's knowledge, his thirst for knowledge, and that's what kind of set us on the path that led us to Brightmont Academy, which we had no idea existed before all this happened.
So tell me a little bit more about this. Sort of, you guys are, raising Stone, and he's limited speaking autistic, and all of a sudden this sort of spelling to speak comes about. Tell me the story a little bit about sort of how you guys came about that, and you guys went to San Diego. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it was literally 3 years ago, almost to the day. I'd gotten a call from a mutual friend, actually a college friend of mine, who had been kind of watching the journey, and she was friends with another family. The Hanley family. J.B. Hanley wrote a book called Underestimated that had come out a few years ago, talking about their journey. And his son was very similar to Stone, non-speaking in the intensive ed program. Again, a lot of parallels. And so she knew that in their case, because she played tennis with a mom, that they had success with communication. She didn't know completely how it worked, but she knew that it was success. And she just wanted to kind of like, hey, you might want to check this out, sort of a thing.
Sure.
And so, ironically, I'd actually bought the book before. I'd heard about it somewhere in one of these autism parent groups, and it had sat on the shelf. And I'm like, well, I got to check it out. So I sat down, read it, bawled my eyes out from the story. And it's just like, because the story is just so profound, very similar journey in terms of unlocking Jamie. JB talks about that. And my friend Laura was able to connect me with JB and actually have a conversation, which was great to learn more about it. And he was like, dude, you just got to do it. You got to go to the best practitioner on the West Coast. Her name's DM.
Hmm.
She's in San Diego. Book a bunch of sessions with her. Just do a trip down here, and you'll be blown away. And so I talked to my wife, Renee, and we're like, hey, let's give it a go. I mean, what do we have to lose? Because we had tried, like so many other families, everything, before ABA therapy, speech therapy, OT, all kinds of naturopathic, you name it, right? Where
Yeah.
you're desperate for
Yeah.
anything that will help unlock your child. And so
Hmm.
again, we figured, what do we have to lose? Worst case, spend 3 or 4 days in San Diego,
There are
which
worse
is
things, right?
yeah, we're worse. Like I love San Diego. It's a great. Seriously, I knew it was like it's gonna be a fun getaway with
Yeah.
Stone. Um, so we went, and as I mentioned to you ahead of time, like literally the first session with a practitioner, I almost fell out of my chair, just in terms of seeing what was inside. Just
Yeah.
witnessing that firsthand was just unbelievable. She turned to me and said, "Yeah, I know this is paradigm changing, isn't it?" And I said, "Yeah, I mean," and it's just been off to the races ever since.
That must have been one of the most amazing. And talk about moments where you cry. I mean, that must have been unbelievable to see something that you've probably known and felt for his entire life. That sort of some part of you knows that there's more to this kid than what we're able to see, what he's able to show us, and to finally see after however many years, 13, 14 years, that here's this tool
Yeah,
that
six,
unlocks
six, almost
that
17
60,
years. Yeah,
almost so
almost.
yeah, even
Yeah,
that there's just
yeah.
this tool here that unlocks what he's trying to show us and lets him. I mean, it must have been such an awesomely powerful moment for all of you guys. That's such an incredible story. I gotta tell you, Dave, it's awesome to hear.
Yeah, it was, so that was kind of the beginning of his junior, was, you call it junior year, but again, because he
Hmm.
was in the intensive ed program, whatever,
Yeah.
time was split between an academic classroom and then work, they call it life skills, work experience type of,
Hmm.
arrangement, sort of a thing, kind
Hmm.
of going back and forth. But we jumped right into it. I bought the letter boards, started working with him at home right away because I was just so jacked, and so was he. He was,
Yeah.
a willing
Yeah.
participant, which isn't always the case because it's a lot of work to train the motor skills.
Hmm.
I know you're familiar with apraxia, that brain body disconnect, which is
Yep.
really, it turns out, is the big issue, and that's the big mistake I think collectively as a society we've made for too long because of the apraxia and the lack of knowledge, it's assuming that there is a cognitive deficit
Hmm.
with this community of non-speakers when there's none. I mean, it's the opposite. These are brilliant, brilliant individuals.
So
And the deficit is just in their ability to control their body, which we need to do to communicate.
yeah. So David, I'm putting myself in your shoes. I have a 2-year-old daughter. She's certainly not 16, 17 years old, but
Right.
I'm thinking, if we had gone through 16 years of struggling, we find this letterboard, we've unlocked his brain, and then the school tells us, no, you can't use it. I to blow a gasket would not have begun to define
Right.
how I would have felt in that moment, David. I mean, describe that to me. How did you deal with that? What did you guys do? That must have been wow.
I was it's a combination of initially being dumbfounded,
Yeah.
right? Kind of like, what, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
To angry, but there is a little backstory to give you, Griffin, too, that's equally surprising, which is finding out that actually the speech, it's ASHA, which is the Professional Association for the Speech Language Pathologists,
Hmm.
came out with a positioning paper and statement, which you will find on their website, that opposes spelling to communicate as a methodology. Yeah. And long story short, there's been a progression when it comes to communication partnering, kind of facilitated communication to spelling to communicate, and this form of communication. Um, and it really kind of started with facilitated communication was kind of where it all started back in the 90s, just to give a brief history. And this is something that, got some attention. It really involves individuals who really struggle with their motor and requires some level of support with their arm, with a type of practitioner or with a partner, so to
Hmm.
speak. There were a couple of high profile cases in the 90s where there was some level of influence that was determined with, like I said, high profile sex abuse case.
Ooh.
And so what's happened is people have tried to use those two rare, whatever they were, a couple of rare cases,
Hmm.
and conflate it to the whole practice. There were,
Okay.
by that time, there were hundreds, if not a couple thousand. I mean, it's still relatively small, but it grew. And so it kind of,
Hmm.
so from there, it progressed to RPM, which is rapid prompting methodology, which is kind of the precursors of spelling, but it's kind of gone through these different iterations. So what you have though is because spelling to communicate or the spelling methodology does require a communication partner. You have people who try to say, well, because you're there, somehow you're influencing the communicator. That somehow that their thoughts and their words are not their own. And even though that couldn't be further from the truth. I mean,
Yeah.
there's so many ways that it's ridiculous.
Yeah. You've seen
But
it, right? I mean,
and exactly, Griffin, it's one of those things. Anyone who's objective, when they see it,
hmm.
they have no question about
Yeah.
it whatsoever. But anyway, so that's the travesty here is ASHA has a statement up here saying that not only do they not support it, they call it potentially harmful, dangerous,
Wow.
really inflammatory language. So the
Yeah, that must be really
schools and school
frustrating.
districts are using that statement to say, well, we're going to support ASHA and we're not going to have it in our schools. Because speech therapists also, if they want their ASHA credentials, have been threatened to have those credentials pulled if they even
Wow.
so much as support it anyway. So there's like this, that's kind of the backstory too that I kind of knew about, like kind of having a, not to this, not to the degree I do now.
Yeah.
So that's what, but that was the excuse basically the district gave is because, oh, you can't scientifically prove it, blah, blah, blah. And ASHA's against it. So yeah, I was angry and we hired a
Yeah.
law firm and said,
Yeah. That's safe.
all
So then you
right, we're
hired a
going to take you
lawyer. Huh?
on. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So you guys took them to court, or did you guys end up? I gather the lawyer also from talking earlier that the lawyer mentioned Brightmont to you guys.
Yeah, so that's how we learned about Brightmont. So yeah, so fast forward through his junior year, like I said,
Hmm.
like I said, September is kind of the introduction. Yeah, I waited, frankly, a couple of months because again, he was getting better. I wanted to make sure that he was really strong in terms of his ability before I brought it up because I knew that there would be some level of pushback. Like I said, I didn't expect the level that there was. So kind of after the first of the year, when we had requested the accommodation and they said no, and we started kind of the fight. We brought in the attorney about March or April because by then we had pulled him out. We just said, well, this is stupid. We're not, you know, he's getting nothing out of school. He was begging not to go because he hated it because he was being
Yep.
treated like an idiot.
Yep.
And we started, looking at alternatives. And the attorney, because she's focuses on education law and knows
Hmm.
kind of the lay of the land, had suggested Brightmont because of the one-on-one experience. She thought that might be a good fit based on her knowledge.
Yeah.
So we reached out to Tony
Yep.
here in Seattle, and I'll never forget it. Yeah, I tried to explain to him what we're trying to do in the email. He's like, "Well, let me call you," and I tried to. He's like, "Why don't you guys just come in?" And so I brought Stone in to meet with him. I had the letter board, and it was mostly a conversation between Tony and Stone, where they
Okay.
got to talk and interview each other, kind of
That's
like
really cool.
and Tony still talking. He was just blown away by the experience because he said, "Look, it wasn't what I expected, right? Because you can't judge a book by its cover because
Yeah.
Stone stims and again has trouble with his body and
Yep.
has verbal stimming and a lot of different things that are common with non-speakers. But
Hmm.
he was asked great questions and was it was great and Tony's like, yeah, we're in. Bring them in. We're happy to accommodate you. And again, it was just life changing. It was, talking about bringing tears to your eyes. Another story I love to tell is this is when the first class. Once we arranged, we started with a couple classes because we knew this is all new for all of us, right? Like this
Hmm.
whole
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah.
Stone had never been in like a real academic classroom
Hmm.
before. So it was environmental science. His instructor was Amber, and she's going through her lesson, and she stopped and she's asked Stone, "Do you have a question? Do you have any questions?" And that's when it really hit me. You're talking about getting teary eyed. I was like, he finally can ask a question in a classroom. And I always say, I wish I could remember what the question was because I sat there. He asked some
Yeah.
question, whatever it was.
Yeah.
I'm just, even now, I'm getting teary eyed thinking about it.
Yeah. Oh,
He waited 16 years to have that opportunity.
yeah. I was listening to you talk to it's one of the first podcasts. Katie, I think was her first name, or Elizabeth maybe. Last one with a Z. I can't remember her name
But
now.
yeah, Elizabeth. Yep.
Yep. And I was listening. There were two different points. I forget what they were. Where I started tearing up, thinking about my God, what that must have been like as a parent for both of you. It just, I mean, it was just such a powerful story. To just know that your kid waited for 16, 17 years just for the privilege to ask a question.
Ask a question in
It's such a
class.
fundamental,
It's a fundamental
basic
right.
thing. Yeah,
Yeah.
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 It's such an important piece of any child's ability to learn, to understand, to develop the part of their problem solving brain is to be able to ask questions and get that
Right.
feedback.
Right.
That must have been incredible. So Brightmont's been good for him, it sounds like.
It's been incredible. As a matter of fact, he's even made a video specifically about his experience with Brightmont, talking about like people can go to he has a YouTube channel.
When most people see me, they assume I am not smart. This has been the story my whole life. Have you done this too when you see me in this video? Most first impressions should be ignored. You grow tired of nobody thinking you're smart, even though you are. This really hits home every time you hear it at your school, especially when it's your teachers saying it. Yes, it felt hopeless at times. That changed when I was able to communicate. Pretty much my whole life changed. Now I am in a school with teachers who believe I'm smart. Yes, the future looks brighter. I respect those people who look beyond first impressions to learn real traits of the person. My question to you is, are you one of those people? Written by Stone Kaufer using a keyboard and creativity.
Very nice.
Search for Stone Kaufer, you could find it. And he made a video
Nice.
talking about how much of an impact it's had on him, how much he loves the teachers and how they presume competence. And he loves learning. He talks about, he still doesn't do as much, but like the first year or so, every so often during class, he would spell out, "I love this stuff. I love this," like in the middle of algebra or something.
That's
And
awesome.
I would joke with the teacher. I'm like, I mean, you don't get too many students saying in the middle of algebra,
Yeah,
"I love this stuff." And she's like,
yeah.
no, but I appreciate it.
That's fantastic. Oh man. Yeah, I have two other kids who have gone to Brightmont now, and it's a pretty consistent refrain. It's from the parents, from the kid, of just I didn't know that it could be like this. I didn't know that I like
Right.
that my education could look like this. I could get this feedback. I could get this sort of, just treatment, I guess, for lack of a better word, that they would give me the respect and the kindness that I deserve as a person. And I think, you used a phrase that I've heard you use before, David, this presumed competence.
Yeah.
I think that's a really big piece. Tell me a little bit more about that sort of idea of presumed competence and what that means for you guys.
No, I'm glad you've asked because that's really become kind of my mantra and really what's driving, my advocacy, why I started the podcast and all of that. It's presuming competence is just understanding that there, again, like we said, there's way more locked inside than we think. It's understanding that from a cognitive standpoint, there's nothing wrong with these kids or young adults or individuals. And you need to treat them that way. That means not talking to them with baby talk or little kid talk, which you often see in the community.
Hmm.
Um, it's all of it, just understanding. And again, you think about, again, in our world, in our, if all of a sudden you couldn't talk for a week, even say, you would still be, you're soaking up everything around you. We do that, right? If we're in
Yep.
meetings or there's situations when you're like, I'm just not going to say anything, I'm just going to listen. You think about how much you soak up, how much you pick up. They've been doing this their whole lives, and part of it because they have to, right? Like they
Yep.
have to be on every cue. Like if you can't communicate, you're really dependent on really kind of understanding what's going on around you. Plus, you're bored, you've got to occupy your time. So you hear these stories time and again of kids, including Stone, who's talked about how they would learn, just listening to the TV. That was kind of the first great aha moment I had individually with Stone, was I finally just kind of opened up with him. Instead of just asking him questions about lessons we were doing, I just started asking him questions about history. Like, does he know who the last few presidents were? Does he know,
Yeah.
who my favorite football team was? All this stuff. And it was just,
Yep.
again, that was like, oh yeah, he's been soaking it all in, over this time.
So we got a question, or Dave, I think is really appropriate given that we're talking about right now. He said, "What are your educational goals for Stone? What would he like to do with his education from Brightmont?"
Stone is a very ambitious young man. One of the first is a great question because one of the questions I had for him was, what is he passionate about? I'd always wondered that over the years. And he told me he's passionate about learning. And I said, okay, well, what do you want to learn? He's like, I want to go to Harvard. I said, okay. Again, at that moment, I didn't even know he knew what Harvard was. Like that's how far I've had to come in terms of presuming competence. Because
Yeah.
Harvard's not something we talked about.
Yeah.
I graduated from Oregon. My wife graduated from Wisconsin. We're huge sports fans.
Mm-hmm.
So there's always been a lot of college sports in the house, but not Harvard.
Well, if you're listening to everything happening around you, you pick up on, I mean, a phenomenal amount of stuff like Harvard University.
He
Sure.
picked up on it. So that's
Yeah.
his goal. That's where he has his sights set. He wants to go to Harvard. He wants to study law, and he wants to help other non-speakers, avoid a lot of what happened to him.
So tell me, David, you mentioned in their San Diego story this idea of, you guys kind of had to screw it. What do we have to lose? Right.
Right.
And you talked
Yep.
about this presumed confidence. And I think there's a story you have that I like a lot about taking Stone over to the Oregon Ducks game, and the fact that it took a few times before you brought Stone. You went with the other son more than once, it sounded like.
Oh, for years. Yeah.
Before
years.
you brought Stone. And tell me a little bit
Yeah.
kind of the evolution of that and how you got to a place where you were willing to say, screw it, what do we have to lose? Let's bring him.
Yeah. So again, because of the communication challenges, and again, when he was young, as is the case with a lot of autistic kids, he was very sensitive to sounds, the sensory input. So I just didn't really think a loud football game would be the best environment for him. But it was about 3 or 4 years ago. It was actually kind of before he started communicating with the letterboard. I think it was the season before that. I just decided, like I said, screw it, I'm going to take him to the game, because by then we'd finally figured out that, hey, he can wear noise canceling headphones all the time. And guess what? This actually helps him cope with life. Again, that was just one of those things I just kick myself for now, because before we'd be like, oh, nah, he doesn't need it, because we were too concerned with appearances, or again, that attitude of trying to make him fit in with what we, conforming to what we think a student should be doing or looking like, or stupid stuff like that. So anyway, by now, he was wearing the headphones and was doing great in so many different environments. So we drove down to Eugene. It's about a 5-hour drive, and, went to the game, and, he just soaked it all in. And at that time, again, he wasn't communicating yet, but, he was still able to show that he enjoyed it. But what this was one of the key things. A couple months later, this was when I really understood how much he was locked inside his brain. We were just sitting around one night, and I had taken some video at the game, just of the team coming out, just exciting moments, because and he likes to look at pictures. And then he held up the video, and he did say Ducks game. And I was like, whoa. Like, that told me a lot right there.
Yeah.
Again, that he, it was all the connection was there, but also how meaningful it was to him.
Yeah.
And so later, when he was able to communicate with one of his spelling practitioners, she gives him different cues and like, hey, what do you want to write about? And one day he said, yeah, I want to write about my first Ducks game that he went to, and that's what inspired the story that he wrote. And talking about how we stayed at this, it's true, it's like a really cheap motel. We saw a pig in the hall. Someone had brought a pig there. I don't know that
Uh,
the motel's been since condemned and demolished. I can confirm, but it's a great story.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like it was a really great experience for him to be able to like just to have all that kind of a memory, and to be able to share that with you, and that's just a really I think a powerful thing for a kid to be able to have with his dad. And again, I think go
I
ahead.
didn't even know he loved, again, you discover everything, right? But I had no idea he
Yeah,
was such a sports fan, that
yeah,
he loves sports. And now he plays fantasy football. I help show him
it's
how to do
great.
fantasy football, and he
It's
has his
great.
own team and all that. So it just,
That's fantastic.
it's unlocked again this whole new world, and ways for us to connect together, because that's, a
Yeah,
big part of my world too.
yeah. So speaking of that sort of connection, I was listening to the your initial podcast with your producer David Yaz, and he said something that I say a lot to parents, and he said it kind of in passing, and I think it probably spend some more time on it. But he said he had to stop worrying about who his son might become. And I tell this story a lot to parents. I had a colleague once upon a time. I'll keep the story brief. She came home from a vacation, and her 15-year-old daughter threw a massive house party. The DEA, the ATF, the FBI were there.
Oh, wow.
Guns had been stolen and used in crimes of violence. It was really bad. And her mother said to me, after I was done grounding her for the rest of her life and I'd kind of calmed down a little bit, she said, what I realized is that my daughter didn't make this choice in a vacuum, that I had contributed to this choice based
Hmm.
on how I was parenting her, and that I had spent so much time worrying about who she could be, would be, or should be, that I had forgotten to just spend time with who she is and enjoy who she is right now, today, in this moment. And I heard him say that, and I thought, it's a really difficult thing to do, I think, for any parent. And I think, it's probably maybe even more so when, you don't have a choice. You kind of this is sort of what you're gonna have to find a way to get to. Can you tell us a little bit, David, about just kind of how you get from having kind of, I mean, everybody has these pie-eyed dreams for their kids and their, infants and toddlers, and that shifts a little bit when you get a diagnosis of autism and kind of what that's going to look like and what life's going to look like for him. And tell me about kind of just what that journey's been like for you as a parent, as an individual, as a dad that's, fallible.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And it's a cliche, but it's a huge roller coaster. And I think in my case, like you said, you have to kind of reset expectations. You definitely go through a grieving period, because again, you understand, even though you know that there's still so much that's possible, there are certain things that are not going to be possible, that again, that you do dream of, whether it's your dream, it's not their dream, but just things, like I said,
Hmm.
even as simple as playing sports,
Hmm.
playing, going out there, which again is a great story. He has been able to do that since then. But early on, you know, dreaming about him, like he's going to be he would be a hell of a linebacker if he played football. I'll tell you that. And so you go through that, and
Yeah.
then you just kind of recalibrate. I mean, at least in my case, I can only talk about my experience, and it's just really kind of focusing on those little wins, trying to get those little wins. And I think what was hardest for me, Griffin, though, is you kind of plateau at a certain point, like, so especially in elementary school,
Hmm.
dealing with the challenges that we had with the school system, and again, the way that they treated him, and not really knowing that we had any other alternatives, kind of
Yeah.
knowing he was stuck in the system that wasn't doing anything to really help him grow, but not really knowing what else there was to do. And so, especially again, heading into high school, it was kind of like, all right, um, what are our goals? Let's make sure we keep him healthy and protected, and like really kind of these minimal type of goals, which as a
Hmm.
parent you think of anyway, but it's just they're so limited. And that was hard. As J.B. Hanley wrote about in his book, he said you're kind of like in a dark place, right? Because you're just kind of
Hmm.
like, again, at that age, a lot of the, meantime, Ty, like I said, with a twin brother, it
Yeah.
makes it different. But again, even with other parents, with their kids and stuff, they're talking about visiting colleges. They're dreaming about what college they're going to go to. And, you're sitting there and you've got teachers trying to tell you your kid has the cognitive ability of a second grader. And
It's
that's
so
that's just
frustrating.
hard. Yeah, and it's hard to have like a really excited, perspective about the future other than just like being happy that he's a happy, well-adjusted kid.
Yeah.
So that was, you know, that is one of the most powerful aspects, obviously, about unlocking them. I mean, for them too. I mean, you fast forward to today, again, that was 3 years ago. He's he's notorious in all the best ways for his optimism. He is a completely different person. The confidence he carries with himself. He's known for, we go to stores and he loves to say happy, happy, happy. He'll run up to people, high five, happy, happy, happy.
That's
And
awesome.
he spreads joy. And I laugh because we said,
Yeah.
half the people kind of look at him kind of confused, like, or they
Yeah.
ignore him. But a lot of people are just like, hey, they say, hey, I needed that. Thanks.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
loves it. He means it. He just, and he'll talk about that. He just has so much more. He has a ton of optimism about his future now
Yeah.
that I know he didn't have, and nor did we have 3 years ago.
We have another question about Stone here. He's wondering, has Stone found community and friends through Brightmont or elsewhere as well?
Yeah, so he has found community. We've kind of built a community, not so much at Brightmont, just more because of the logistics. I'm his communications partner, and I still do manage the business. So I'm kind of juggling between being his full-time caregiver, communications partner, educate co-teacher now, and still working and managing my business. So we're kind of in and out. There's not a lot of time that we spend hanging out there, but everyone's been great. But we have the last couple of years started building a local community of non-speakers who get together. We called it Beans and Boards. It just started with me and another mom and her son. We got together a couple times and they just loved hanging out. And so we just kind of opened it up and invited other people who we'd met along the way and, Facebook group, but it's really grown. He's part of a weekly Zoom call. It's called Spellers Ohana that he's made friends with there, and it's really cool. So it's a Zoom call like here, and again, just you have a communication partner. Stone's case, he just types in his questions or comments or everything else in the chat, and there's a moderator who reads it for everyone else, and that's been wonderful. So it's been really great to see that he now has like a lot of friends. He really, after not having that for so many years.
Dude, I gotta say, as a parent, your courage is really impressive. I would imagine that there is an instinct to protect Stone from the world around him, especially when I get into the politics of it, but especially given that the world just is a little bit crueler today than it was 8, 10, 15 years ago. And you do like a really impressive job of just in whether it's bringing the Oregon Ducks game, setting up the beans and board with one other parent, just what the hell, why not? Let's give it a go. It really, it's got to be a very difficult balance, wanting to protect him from the world around him and also wanting him to get out and experience the world around him as well, and striking that balance.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yes and no. I mean, again, so much of this Stone. I mean, he's fearless, and so I pick up on that, and he and I've talked, we kind of feed off of each other. And, I've always told him, since he was young, I've always believed that the day would come that he would communicate. I didn't know how,
Yep.
but I knew that there was something inside. And I've always, talked to him and as much as I could about the future to try to stay hopeful as much, and so I've kind of fed off of that. But again, once you see that success, once you see, like I said, that first Ducks game,
Yeah.
yeah, I had that attitude of like, okay, if you only last a quarter, who cares? Like we'll watch the rest of the game in the tailgate area or whatever. It's just, it's all about experience. I've been fortunate enough to learn in my life the value of just experiencing different things. The experience is the great teacher in life. In addition, education is important too. So that's always been important to me, is just to try to expose he and Ty, his brother, to as many different experiences as possible.
I think you talked about just now sort of if we get made only through one quarter and we have to leave, then that's fine. We'll watch the rest of the game somewhere else, and that's no big deal. You've done a really good job, whether it's in that specific instance or it's just through Stone's life in general, it's sort of adjusting your expectations. And I think that kind of goes back to, again, this idea of presumed confidence and people's expectations versus reality, and sort of the presumed competence or the lack of presuming competence based on expectations. You tell us a little bit about kind of the importance for you all of the expectations for Stone and how you've adjusted your expectations and what that's done for you all to just be aware of when you have expectations in the first place.
It's just, it's a journey. I mean, I know it sounds great, and I appreciate that, but again, I wasn't always like this. Again, I've had to learn patience, a lot more patience. We joke about that kind of within the family. I wasn't the patient kid growing up, but I was the passionate one. I've had to learn that. And it's like I said, it's a cliche that these, our kids teach us so much more. It's a lot of times that we teach them. And so a lot of this has come from Stone. Appreciating, like I said, just the small steps, appreciating the moments that you get together. And that's the thing. We've always had a close bond ever since he was young. We just spent a ton of time together, and that was one of the benefits of being self-employed and kind of having that flexibility. My wife deserves a ton of credit because she's the one who's always had the corporate job. She's the one who's had to commute, put in the hours, have the benefits so that we could do all this. We are very fortunate, and I realize that too. Like I said, this is, not everyone has the type of flexibility that we do to be able to provide this type of support for Stone. So there's a lot of components that go into it. Like I said, it's just been a journey. I wish I had a better answer just to say it's just I've had to just adjust as you go, as you do in life.
David, you're talking about your wife and corporate job, and I was listening about what you have to do managing, running your business, and his communicating partner, and a few other things you mentioned. I'm just thinking to myself, when do you sleep, David? It sounds like a hectic day. We have another
They're busy.
question.
They're busy days.
Yeah. It sounded fun, but busy days, eh?
Yeah.
They keep you on your toes. We have another question. Somebody said, I have twins too, and it's been hard for our neurotypical daughter with a twin brother who is neurodiverse. How is the relationship between Stone and Ty? And maybe talk a little bit about kind of how you've helped sort of cultivate that relationship and keep that relationship strong.
That's a really good question. And it is a challenge. It's interesting because the dynamics have had to change so much. Growing up, and now that Stone can communicate, he can share how difficult it was for him to see Ty thriving in school, to see Ty going to STEM, to see him being in these advanced programs, and us, as typical parents, gushing over how smart he was and how great he was doing and how fun it was to go to his junior hockey games and his little league games. It was a lot about Ty, even though, again, Stone was going through therapy and getting a lot of support. There's no comparison, right? Like, I mean, one's a pretty fun life, and and the other isn't as fun. But that script has flipped completely the last 3 years since Stone started communicating. All of a sudden now, and again, part of it had to do with Ty, his age as he was approaching college. It's like, we talked. I said, look, dude, I'm going to have to step away a lot more. This requires full-time attention. Stone needs, to catch up. There's a lot that he was left behind with him that we're going to help him, as much as we can make up for lost time. And that means time together. It means doing more. So it's been a little bit of a challenge. I think Ty would even admit that, but again, it's divide and conquer. My wife has been great. She devotes a lot of her time and energy to helping support Ty, and he just finished his first year at University of Washington and is doing great.
Congratulations. That's a big deal.
Yeah. It's really good.
Yeah.
So as far as but getting back to the question, the relationship, it's hard to define because, again, Stone needs a communication partner with me, so we communicate. It's grown, especially this summer has been really good. I think there's been a lot of growth. Stone has always said it's been clear that he just worshiped the ground Ty walks on. And he's told him, I want to have a closer relationship with you. I think it's been more of an adjustment for Ty now. I think he's still going through that paradigm shift of, for so many years having this brother who he knew was different. And then, trying to establish his own identity as well. But I think that, as they're getting older and more mature, we're seeing them grow closer. And I think that's going to continue over time.
I think it's a challenge for almost every parent I've talked to that has a neurodiverse kid and a neurotypical kid of how do we balance our time? One of these kids is requiring a lot more of our time and energy. And the other one, how do we do this equally? And I think the message I've always given them is you're not going to be equal. Best you can go for is equitable. That's
a great way of
that's
putting
the
it.
Conversation you have with your son or daughter is sort of this is what he needs right now, and we try to get you what you need when you need it as well, but this is what he needs right now, so this is how we're going to have to divvy out time. And you are to some extent relying on that kid, your other child and your neurodivergent child being understanding, being aware of just this is how it goes sometimes. But again, it's a really difficult conversation to have. I think every parent I've worked with has had a very hard time sort of managing that conversation, managing that dynamic, because everyone feels a little bit bad that they're giving more time to one kid than the other kid, and there's guilt around that. There's just a lot of feelings, and it's a hard thing to get through. Lindsay says, it sounds like Stone really found a place where he feels success and belonging. What about his experience at Brightmont do you think contributed to this shift for him?
Presuming competence from day one. Again, starting with Tony to the teachers, every teacher that he's had has never doubted his ability to thrive as a student, and they've adjusted as needed. There's the self-paced arrangement of Brightmont is perfect for him, so there's not the pressure like, hey, we have to get through, we have to finish this quarter by this date. Because sometimes, again, he just like any student, he has good days and bad days. Mostly good days. I mean, not even bad days, but it's just like, sometimes you just get through. It takes longer to get through material, especially again when the communication is slower because he has to spell things out with me and things like that. But I would just say it's just been really that, the flexibility and the presuming competence. No one, he's never doubted for a second. It took him a while because he would ask questions, and every so often he might say, "Do you still think I'm smart?" Or do you, but early on he would say, "Do you think I'm smart?" And it was really hard for him when he would get answers wrong because he was worried that if he got something wrong, that all of a sudden we would think, "Oh, he's not as smart as we thought he was," and we had to reassure him and talk to him like, hey, smart people get wrong answers too. Like that's part of learning. That's literally what learning is realizing what you don't know too.
David, how valuable would you say for Stone those student teacher relationships have been for him, for his development of his confidence, for just him as a person? I know that for a lot of kids, that one-to-one, the academic side of it's really helpful and really important, but then we discuss a little bit less often, I think, is just the impact that relationship has on that kid when they have that strong student teacher relationship.
Huge. Yeah, I think it's huge. It's the primary reason I pushed for this type of why I wanted him to go to a school. Like I said, I didn't know what that model would be, but there are a lot of families who opt for the homeschooling or e-learning model, especially if their public school is not accommodating them. A lot of times that's their only option, and I get that. That is an option. But in our case, I really wanted him to have that experience of learning from a teacher, building that relationship. I think we've all had relationships and experiences, both good and bad. I'm a big proponent. Sometimes, you don't have a great teacher. That's okay. Because again, you're going to work with people who aren't so great in life. And again, that's all part of the experience.
So David, we're starting to get to the end here.
Yeah.
I'm hoping we can spend a few minutes with you telling us about the podcast, because I gotta tell you, I listened to it just this afternoon, about a week ago, and I was really impressed with what you guys are covering and the way you're covering it. I was really impressed. I wanted to give you a few minutes to talk about the lighter side of autism and just what you guys are doing over there.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And so it was something that I'd always wanted to do and finally decided to, pull the trigger last fall. And as I thought about it, I really wanted the focus to be, as the title says, on the lighter side. There are a lot of kind of heavy, deep aspects that come with being a parent. It's hard to navigate. It's easy to feel overwhelmed. But I really wanted this to be a resource and a source of hope for parents and caregivers and educators, those who are kind of in the community, because I've learned a ton over the last 17 plus years since Stone's diagnosis. I've met a lot of great people, and that's my motivation. It's just I want to help people, whether it's one family at a time. Just, hey, this is something I hadn't thought of, or a resource I didn't know about, perspective I hadn't thought about, as we're learning more. And it's been a lot of fun. I really enjoy it.
I said there's some really cool interviews on there, so I encourage everyone to check it out. It's the David Kaufer podcast, The Lighter Side of Autism. I think we've got the link in the chat right now. Check it out, because it's really awesome stuff. So we're running out of time for this podcast. Again, my name is Griffin Rouse. You can contact me by emailing me, griffin@highsierracoaching.com. We'd like to thank everybody for joining us today. If we didn't get to any of your questions, we will do our best to get to it next time we talk. We've been doing this podcast every month with different guests. We've been looking forward to seeing everybody again next month. And we hope everybody has a fantastic night. Thanks for coming, guys.